already. I did that video. It's a little mediocre. I'm going the wrong direction. Back here. I'm not leaving the spot. I'm gonna go AFK.
On a flexible chain. The key to damaging a target with a blunt weapon is the amount of rotation and velocity you can get with it. You can move a blunt object really fast, but it won't have much effect if it only travels a couple of inches. You can also have good rotation, but if there's no power behind the swing, then you won't get any effective damage with the weapon. Now, if you're on horseback, then you will most likely get the amount of velocity that you want with it. And again, it wouldn't have any immediate physical resistance like any other weapon, so long as you're able to swing the weapon with enough direction, you can inflict some serious damage. Though I do suppose that applies with a lot of weapons used on horseback. Okay, that was a little bit of a tangent because now I want to talk about something a bit more applicable. A flail on foot. Now, specifically, the one-handed flail on foot is going to be a bit less practical for lack of a better word. That doesn't mean it's impractical, it just limits what you can do compared to a one-handed mace, warhammer, etc. For starters, you need much more of a wind-up to get the force you'd actually want to cause any sort of significant damage to your target. That and the actual amount of controllable elements are a lot less than other non-flexible weapons. So you could, in turn, have a lot more glancing on rounded plate areas like helmets and pauldrons. Also, in some non-conclusive tests, it shows that on a stationary target, the damage output is roughly the same, if not less, than a normal mace when using equal amounts of force. That then begs the question, what does the flail have that gives it a unique advantage? Well, for starters, you can take the same amount of length as a normal mace, but with the capability to fold it in half. This makes it better for storage reasons, of course. Another advantage is the flail's ability to wrap around targets. That means that you could possibly hit behind a target's shield or around the weapon, which makes static blocks a lot more dangerous for the opponent. On the same note, you can't really block with a flail, another reason which makes it a bit better as a cavalry weapon. Now, the Conqueror does use a shield, which is necessary due to him not having any defensive capabilities without it, but before we go into shields, we need to talk about the different types of flails the Conqueror has. And before we even talk about that, I want to quickly mention another video that talks about flails. You may have already heard of him, his name is Matt Easton of Schola Gladiatoria, and he has a video specifically of the uses behind a single-handed flail on foot. He has some really interesting points that is a must watch if you're interested in the use of a flail as a weapon, along with some in-person examples with the flail he actually owns. So to start talking about the in-game flails, I would like to address some things that I'll be referencing from historical sources. Because I want to keep this short, I'm only going to briefly talk about this. Again, if you want even more details, there is info elsewhere. But when looking at medieval depictions of flails, we can see the classic ball and chain style, which is very common in pop culture representations of it. We have some where there's no chain at all, which Paulus Hector Mayer even made a whole treatise on. And finally, we have one with multiple chains and could possibly even have weighted attachments along the entirety of the chain until the end. The term flail can be as broad as me saying the term sword. If I wanted to isolate and make even more in-depth subsets of flails, I could. But I won't, because this information should suffice for now. Let's start with the Conqueror's flail head options. Now, he has multiple various shapes and sizes, which I have no doubt could all accomplish the same job, so instead of talking about what is effective, I'm going to talk about what is similar to things that we've seen before in history. I'll separate them into three categories: ball-shaped, flange-shaped, and cylindrical-shaped. Ball-shaped is reminiscent of what you might consider a Morningstar type of mace to look like. This is the most plausible for Conqueror's style of flail, and most prevalent in historical sources for this style of flail as well. The flange shape is more like a flanged mace, but I could not find any detailed depictions of flanged flail. Considering that it is much easier to make a rounded iron ball with studs on it than it is to do a bunch of forge welding to make a flanged head, I think that this makes it a less probable option. That being said, it doesn't mean it never could have happened, and if you find a historical depiction of this, then please share it with me, I would love to see. Lastly, we have the cylindrical shaped head, akin to the long two-handed flails we see in Paulus Hector Mayer's treatise, along with other sources showing us similar weapons. Now, this type of head seems to be exclusive to the two-handed style of flail, but it appears Conqueror has these options for his flail as well. So let's start getting into the in-game ones, and like I said before, I'm only going to talk about notable ones just to make it simpler, and so I don't have to go over everything. Starting with the ball-shaped head list, we have the Ariadne Head. This simple head with different shaped spikes looks crude and misshapen, but it shows the simplicity of what is required for a weapon like this. It doesn't need to be perfect so long as it has enough weight to inflict damage. Next we have the Barian Head. This is yet another iron ball with thick studs on it. It's best to have the thick studs rather than long, sharp spikes, which are more likely to get stuck in a target. Now, in a weapon that is more maneuverable than a flail like a warhammer or mace, you might be able to pry it out of your target, but it's still an inconvenience. So think about how difficult it would be with a weapon as flexible as a flail. Next, we have the Cylindrical and the Dualicosa Head. They're both the same model. This one is definitely one of my favorites due to how large the studs, or spikes, can't really tell, are. They are incredibly wide and cone shaped, so that it'll make it very unlikely to get stuck in your target. That covers the ball ones, and let me just say that pretty much all the heads for Conqueror's Flails are very plausible, and that just because I didn't say something about it doesn't mean I couldn't have. So good job Ubisoft, Conqueror has very good weapon design. Anyways, let's move on. So now we have the flange type heads. To start off, we have the Pelennor and Dark Pelennor head. Pretty simple flange mace head with appendages that protrude outward from the head. The more force localized in a single point of contact, like a spike, or in this case a protruding flange, makes that amount of inertia transferred in that specific point of contact even more dangerous to the target. So that means more deadly, but a high chance of the flail heads sinking into the target, making it more difficult to remove. Pros and cons, I guess. Next we have the Petrifier Head, which is a very interesting take on a flanged head. Definitely plausible, but most likely not a mace that would be used on a battlefield considering how ornate it is. Also, notice the fleur-de-lis on the top of it. Very nice touch. Next, the Ariadne Head. This is a very interesting one and my personal favorite. It is much smaller than the other flail heads that the Conqueror has at his disposal, and that's not a bad thing at all. The heavier the head on the flail, the more difficult it's going to be to swing it around, and it doesn't take much to kill someone with a percussive weapon like a flail or a mace. So personally, I think that it's probably the more realistic one out of all the flange heads, at least for a mace. Next we have the Meridia Head. When I look at it, it reminds me of slices of bread, but if I look at it from my peripheral vision, I kinda see one of those cliche royal queen crowns. You know, the puffy velvet top ones. Regardless, another good example of a good flanged mace head. That covers the flanged heads, and now we're moving on to cylindrical heads. This will be quick because there's only a few I'm even going to talk about. Starting off, we have the All Mace Head. I find it funny because its name is All Mace, but it is in fact a flail. Jokes aside, this one's pretty good if it were a bit longer and attached directly to a long shaft. Then it would look like it could be a historical two-handed flail, although the spikes are a bit too pointy on this one. Minor details, but otherwise solid. Next we have the Dark Noah Head, not as much cylindrical as its box shape, but it makes sense in this category as well. Again, it would work if it was lengthened out and attached to a shaft to make a two-handed flail, as that detail pretty much applies to all these heads, just assume it's implied for the next ones as well. Next, the Sagamore Head. There are a lot of studs on this one, probably more than needed, but at least they are studs instead of spikes, so that way they don't get stuck. Other than the fact that this looks like it will probably feel like you're swinging around the weight of a terrestrial planet attached to a chain, this one's pretty good. Lastly, we have the Gustav Head. Okay, I take it back from the last one. I can actually feel the gravitational pull on this one just by looking at it. But besides its size, it has a good shape to it and good studding to it as well. That is, of course, if some weren't missing somehow. I'm going to assume that they were chipped off or something in battle because it's not like the studs were riveted on after forging the head, so they really shouldn't be able to come off. Regardless, it's not bad. Okay, so that's all the flail heads done, so now let's move on to the handles. Now, if you haven't watched my Lawbringer analysis video, specifically the one on his weapons, then you're missing out. Link in the top right corner. Okay, putting my plugins aside for a moment, in my Lawbringer analysis I said something along the lines that poleaxe shafts are pretty much just meant to be long, sturdy wooden rods. Obviously there's a bit more to it than that, but that's just the gist of it. The reality of it is that pretty much every weapon uses wood for its handles. Polearms, axes, maces, flails, and even, yes, swords. Really, a basic fit-for-battle flail doesn't need much past a solid wooden shaft for a handle. Now in depictions we can see more than that, like a disc guard and a disc pommel. Sometimes we even see a completely dedicated grip that is possibly wrapped, coated, or made entirely out of a separate material. But when thinking of a practical weapon that is going to see constant and rigorous use, it's probably best to make a weapon that can be repaired or replaced efficiently like wood can. So for the handle section, we're going to make that our starting point. Welcome back to which of our options does it best at being a stick. Luckily, we actually have a lot of really good options, so again, congratulations Ubisoft. You did good. Now go give Warden some love because his options are abysmal compared to the rest of the roster. As for Conqueror's handles, the one I decided to go with is the Cunningham Handle. Now, this might not look like wood, but before you say that, you can see the top half of the handle, that the entire core of the handle is wood, but then is reinforced by metal langets that cross over each other and then riveted to the handle. The handle also comes with a leather wrap and a pommel for better grip. My only problem is that the pommel is ridiculously spiky. If you don't know what you're doing or aren't paying attention, you might hurt yourself. But besides that, this one is definitely the best structurally and practically. A good runner-up for it would have been the Goddard Handle. So this one is made out of entirely wood, and really, they should have left it there. But then they decided to add some rivets towards the top, which is okay, but then they added some weird metal inlay to the grip part of the handle. If anything, that should have been leather as well, and I could have bought it. Soldiers, believe it or not, had a bit of free time in between fighting and marching. Some of the things that they do is modify their equipment to suit their needs. I could see a soldier whittling away at his basic wood handle into this shape, but I couldn't see them taking the time to get an intricate metal inlay into the grip, especially for something that might get damaged, or actually did get damaged, because I don't know about you, but that handle looks like it's definitely seen better days. So who knows how much more it'll take until it starts splintering and then breaks. What good does a metal inlay do for you then, huh? Okay, time to move on to other options that either aren't wood or are also pretty plausible, but regardless, this isn't a list of best to worst. A lot of these handles are really practical, and if I didn't put them here, it's most likely because I'm trying to save time. First, we have Bayek's Fury Handle. Wood grip, brass pommel, top area. Really good handle, although I don't know how well the brass will hold up to abuse. Next, we have the Medusa Handle. Now, this one is an all-metal handle, but I know for sure that at least for maces, metal handles were used. This is a pretty good example of a simple yet elegant design for a non-wood handle. Other than the fact that a metal handle makes an already heavy weapon heavier, this is a good handle design. They just need to clean the rust though. Next, the Ariadne Handle. I'm just going to suspend my disbelief here and just pretend that whatever metal they use is hardenable, or at least hardened enough to a functional extent. That being said, the shape, the pommel, the grip, it's all really good. Smooth enough to not be uncomfortable for the user, but realistic enough to get a good grip anywhere on the handle. So long as it's not too heavy and or too weak, this is an undeniably solid handle. Next, the Dualicosta might be what I was looking for, as it's literally the same model. Thanks, Ubi. Anyways, as I'm typing this script, I'm looking at the types of handles and giving my on-the-spot thoughts about them, so I didn't see this handle coming up. Anyways, yeah, this one is good and debatably better than the Ariadne because it looks like it's made out of steel compared to brass like the other one. Next, we have the Meridia Handle. This one is reminiscent of handles we might see on maces, and rightfully so. It has a good design with what looks like solid construction. Next, Meridia. It was the last one, but with a little bit more fanciness to it. Next, we have the Gustav Handle. I can't see the core of this weapon, so let's assume it's metal. Overall, beautiful leather wrap with a pleasant looking pommel. It's a solid handle. Next, the Barian Handle. Just like my life, it looks beaten, seen its fair share of shit, and barely holding it all together. But if we can look past the rust, scratches, and the random leather lace that I'm assuming is trying to prevent the handle from splintering anymore, then I'm sure it was a very good handle. Once. Really, this would be a good handle if it didn't have such a dangerous pommel on it. Forget that it's incredibly spiky in multiple directions. I don't think that they had a tetanus shot in the Middle Ages, so I would think that this would be extremely hazardous to the user. But again, minor detail I suppose. And finally, another handle barely making it into here is the Chillin handle. Now, the studs on the handle don't look as dangerous to the user, and that's why I'm putting it in here, because if we were to look past that, we have a solidly constructed handle, including a cord wrap grip, which I don't think we've seen in any of the analyses yet, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that this one is a pretty good one, again, if we were to look past its issues a bit. So now that we've covered flails, I'm going to talk about shields, specifically the shield that the Conqueror uses. Now, again, if you're very well versed in medieval history, you might already know what a heater shield is. A few things that make the shield notably a heater shield is the shape of the shield in general, and the attachment system of the shield to the user's arm. The shape of a heater shield is very iconic, and maybe even a bit cliché, to a knight's image. I mean, this is even the shape used in-game for the knight's faction icon. Let's talk about the attachment system for the heater shield. As you can see, it's strapped to the arm on one side, and on the other side you can see that there is a handle for the user to grip. Now, what made this shield very interesting is its overall versatility. What do I mean by that? Well, we know that the heater shield was used on foot, but it was also used on horseback. More specifically, you could use it as a jousting shield. This is due to the shield's incredible strength and durability. This is also one of the reasons it has the 2-point attachment system to make it more usable for mounted combat. These shields could be made out of wood like most other shields, but in some rare cases were reinforced with metal. This, in turn though, would make the shield very heavy. Now let's discuss some of the in-game shields and see how they compare to historical shields. So for starters, let's talk about your average heater shield. They would usually be all wood with cloth, canvas, or leather wrap across the entirety of the wood to protect it. Then, it might have had a raw hide or some sort of leather edging around the shield to reinforce those edges. Unfortunately, there are pretty much no shields in For Honor that come close to this description. When Ubisoft makes shields for any characters, they are inclined to either have it be all metal or exposed wood with some metal edging. With that being said, that unfortunately makes all the shields improbable to some extent. But let's look at what we have to work with and see what some of the best ones are. So if I had to choose, I'd say the best one is the Meridia shield. Pretty much all the shields have some sort of metal piece in the center, like a shield boss, which is uncharacteristic for a heater shield, and more so, every shield has metal edging to it. So this is the shield with the least of it, and that's pretty much why I chose it. But it still has more metal on it than it should, and it doesn't have any sort of wrap around it that would protect it from external elements like rain or dirt. So even though I'm picking this as my choice, it's not the best a shield could be or how it should be. Another shield that I would say is tied with the Meridia shield is the Lamorak shield. This again, in trying to limit how heavy the shield would be, has the least amount of metal possible. Funny enough, you wouldn't want to have metal edging around a shield due to the fact that it'd actually be more advantageous to the enemy's weapon to get stuck in your shield rather than it sliding off and accidentally hitting you, or possibly continuing the momentum with another strike if it were to glance off. That being said, metal was used to reinforce some heater shields, especially the shields used for jousting, as heater shields were the stepping stone to making a designated jousting shield. But anyways, unfortunately historical shields have never been Ubisoft's strong suit. Obviously that's not a really big deal for the majority of the player base, but for people like me it's always fun to appreciate it when they can do things like that. I'm just upset that I know I'm going to be just as disappointed when I get to Blackbriar and Warlord. Anyways, that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed, leaving a like would be appreciated. Conk's armor will most likely be next. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or information about flails or heater shields that you'd like to share, go ahead and leave it down below. If you've been here regularly, then you know I do try my best to read all of the comments. If you are new to my videos, then I pretty much do this, sword reviews, and other weapon-based and historical content. If that interests you, subscribing would be your best bet to keep up to date with these videos. Anyways, thank you for watching, and also thank you to everyone who's been waiting for the next video. My plan is to start releasing more videos at a faster pace now that I'm back to my day-to-day life. Hopefully, if you guys enjoyed this video, I will see you in part 2. Peace.
Hundreds have fallen before me.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Conqueror Realism Analysis. Here we're talking about armors, finishers, and emotes. He doesn't have anything interesting that I want to talk about for his feats or his signatures, and all of his ornaments look like someone TIG welded some scrap metal they found in the garage onto Conqueror's forehead, and he just hasn't realized it. Now with that out of the way, you already know how this works by now, and if you don't, welcome to the channel. But anyways, let's just get right into it. We are starting off with Conk's helmet options. He has, in very broad categories, 2 types of helmets. He has the enclosed helm variant, and he has the kettle helm variant. We'll start with the one that's most quickly to explain, which is the kettle helm. Kettle helms have always been a staple of mid to late medieval helmets, just due to its effective yet simple and inexpensive design. It gets its name from the English perspective of it looking like a kettle, yet in German and French it was known more as the iron hat in their respective languages. What makes it ubiquitously hat-like is the brim that all kettle helms appear to have. Now the overall design for the kettle helm appears to come in many different forms, so many that it would take a very long time to go over all that have been documented. So instead, let's focus on the ones the Conqueror has at his disposal. Before we get to that, to my knowledge there are no kettle helms that cover the face. If you can find any source that contradicts that, I'd love to know. For people that use the kettle helm, there's no such need for an attribute like face protection for mostly 2 reasons. First, it would limit their overall sense, which might include their sight and hearing, but it also might limit their breathing as well. Now, if you're your everyday guardsman or you're just manning a gate during peace times, that would be quite cumbersome for your everyday job. Secondly, the key allure to using a kettle helm is its simplicity and its cost. This means that should it get damaged or should you lose it, it would be something that you could replace. Especially if you had an outfit an entire battalion of men-at-arms, you'd probably want to find the most inexpensive option that would still provide protection for them. In later periods when kettle helms were in use, you could also find people who were using sallets as well. And in the case of the sallet, you could provide full face protection with an attachment of a plate bearer to it. So again, the kettle helm fits a very specific purpose that does not need to fill another. And technically you could wear a plate bearer with the kettle helm, but that's a tangent about armor that I don't want to go down right now. Back to Conqueror's kettle helm options, we can separate them into 3 different designs. I'll call each design the fluted variant, the pointed variant, and the center ridge variant respectively. Now, these helmets, without their face protection of course, are all very realistic, and I would even go as far to say historically accurate. Now, the backing that all of them had was usually comprised of some sort of leather strips or some sort of studding. This isn't needed, however, the helmet itself should protect the back of your head from downward strikes, which is going to be the most likely form of attack that someone is going to encounter. That being said, to truly protect the back of your head, and really any exposed part of your body in general, would be with mail. It is very common to see the kettle helm paired with some sort of mail coif. Could it be paired without a mail coif? Of course. It could be paired with a padded coif or just without any layer at all, so long as your helmet has a lining to it. That being said, their choice of using leather strips is interesting, but I don't think it takes away from the general effectiveness of the helm. So let's quickly touch on each kettle helm variant before we move on to the enclosed helm. Fluting is quite a difficult procedure, which makes it quite interesting why it'd be done to something as common as a kettle helm. But you have to remember that kettle helms weren't just used by the poor. They were just a usable helmet that were worn by all classes of soldiers, especially if they wanted a helmet that would have good ventilation. So could I see a smith taking the time to make a fluted kettle helm? Sure, if someone paid them to do it. Fluting on armor doesn't just make it look better too, it also reinforces it slightly by adding more thickness to where the bumps are. Moving on, we have the pointed variant. Now this variant you might have seen before, either in historical depictions, or maybe you've seen a reproduction of this type of armor. This is probably my favorite of the kettle helms just due to its shape. Now, the in-game one seems to have another plate of metal riveted on the front of it. Maybe this is some sort of repair instead of replacing it, or maybe this is some sort of reinforcement attached to provide better protection. I have no idea, as I haven't seen something like this before. If you have any information about it, let me know. Finally, we have the center ridged variant. It's kind of reminiscent of an Italian style of kettle helm, but with much more pronounced center ridge. Now I love simplicity, and this one definitely gets an A+ in that category. There is nothing on this helmet except flat metal. So that means no attachments, no engravings, no riveting, just a simple metal helmet. And that truly summarizes the charm about this style of helmet. I'm adding in a helmet because I finished the script before the new armors dropped, but once I got a chance to look at Conk's new helmet up close, wow. The entire edge of the helmet is lined with fleur-de-lis. The breasts on the face mask have quatrefoils in them. This mask is so ornate, it's almost a shame what armor it was paired with. If Conqueror ends up getting a set of armor this detailed in the future, then it will be a bright future indeed for cost. That sums up kettle helms. Now you might be wondering, what about the face protection? I can't say anything about them historically, and well, if you see my previous videos, then you already know what's going on. Does it have ventilation? Yes? Good. Does it have dedicated eye slits? Yes? Good. If you want more information, I think that Warden Part 2 would be a good place to get my opinion on it. Otherwise, feel free to ask a question about it and I'll help give my opinion on it. Now we can move on to the enclosed helm. Now you might be wondering why I call it the enclosed helm, and that's due to its place in history. This was the helm that bridges the gap between older style nasal helm, which provides little to no face protection, to the great helm, which can encompass an entire user's head. The enclosed helm was the first designed to try and protect the face while also being a part of the top of the head protection as well. This then created a design where it's almost like a mask that was attached to your average helmet. Now, there aren't any surviving examples of this helmet from what I could find, but there are multiple examples in artwork and in effigies that give us a general idea of what it would look like. As you can see, the concept of the great helm was there, but it hadn't been fully envisioned yet. It also may seem like they all have different features, and that might be the case as this was a time that they were experimenting all the way up until we see as the bucket helm great helm is, and even then, that adapted into the sugarloaf helm. That's a completely different story for another time though. Let's look at Conqueror's helmets and see what we got. So basically, there are only 8 helmets that fit into this enclosed helm category, and really only one of them I could recommend as most realistic. The best out of the options, in my opinion, would be the Regulus Helmet. This helmet has all designs of your average enclosed helm, including a face protection with eye slits and ventilation, and a flat top that was common at the time due to them experimenting with what designs were most effective for combat. Now, usually the wearer would have some sort of mail coif to protect their neck and the back of their head region, but it appears that we have something different here. It looks like some sort of chainmail aventail with some sort of leather liner to back it up. For starters, those rings on the chainmail are much too big. Smaller pointed objects would have a much easier chance to slip through there. Also, why is the Conqueror wearing a do-rag underneath his helmet? Regardless, the fact that he has chainmail to begin with and has a pretty historically accurate helm to pair with it makes this the best helm out of all of his options for realism. As for his other options, well, either there's no dedicated way for him to see out of the helmet, or it's just ridiculously over the top with spikes and such. More specifically, the ones he most recently got before Year 4 armor actually have much thicker and much better chainmail than the Regulus one. But because the face protection themselves are just too outlandish, it couldn't take first place. And I don't mean the skull one or the face mask one, I mean the one where it's being held up with leather straps. What is this? He looks like medieval Bane.
Oh, you think
Shield bash.
this is your ally? You merely adopted the
Bash.
I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was already a man. By then it was nothing to me but blinded.
Okay, enough of that, let's move on. Now we're going to look at arms. Now, lore-wise, I understand that the Conqueror is basically a conscripted criminal. I think it's also said that they are basically what used to be minions, and then after showing exemplary work on the battlefield, were then permitted to become a Conqueror, hence why they both use the heater shield. I can't remember how accurate all of that is, but you get the gist of it. Basically, the Conqueror is poor. This would explain why the helmet options are that of someone with a budget, to say the least. He doesn't have the newest great helm like the Warden does, or he uses a kettle helm, which like the current version of the minions use as well. With that being said, it doesn't explain why his armor choices for his arms are the way that they are. In some cases, his chains wrap around his arms, most likely to reference his criminal background and the fact that he's still bound in chains even though he is on the battlefield. I suppose for lore reasons this makes sense, but we aren't here to talk about the lore. We're here to talk about whether or not it's practical. I don't think I need to say something about this, but just to be completely clear so everyone understands, no. Wearing chains around your forearm does not constitute as armor. No, Conqueror, spikes attached to leather doesn't count either. For the sake of brevity, I won't be going over all the variants of armor again, like always. If you have any questions on something specific, feel free to ask. But I will talk about a few. For starters, I want to talk about the Somber Exodus or Prison Guard, or really any of these variants because they all have this. Besides the weird plate squares on his biceps that are useless and barely count as a form of protection, we're actually here to talk about the forearms. I get it, he's poor, he can't afford a lot of armor. Okay, I understand that. But then why does he put, which I can only presume, the one forearm bracer that he has behind his shield instead of his exposed arm? It just doesn't make sense. Even if it's the excuse of what if something breaks the shield and goes into his arm, then unless it damages the joint in his elbow, which the bracer wouldn't even protect, and he can still raise his arm, he can fight. The shield is strapped to him. Meanwhile, if he were to take serious damage to his primary weapon hand, and could no longer hold a weapon, he'd be basically defenseless on a battlefield. Food for thought. Moving on. Let's talk about the Megna's arms and any of its variants. This one definitely has a lot of promise to it, except for two things. One, like always, the